Thank you. Thank you, Paula, for this nice introduction. Very happy to be here, and welcome to you all. Maybe in advance I have to say I might be a little bit controversial, or I'm hoping that I'm not shocking everyone, but I prefer to speak quite frankly and then open up the debate. It's very useful to understand where my thoughts are coming from. And Paula also already mentioned I'm a kind of hybrid person. So I have been an academic for many years. I still think that my identity is an academic one. But I worked for many, many years in ministries, in responsible positions with ministers of education. And I think because of this hybrid personality that I was recruited at the OECD, because they told me we were not looking for a full-blown, high-level academic. We were looking for someone who is academic, who knows and understands research, but who can talk to ministers. And that's why I have been at the Center for Educational Research and Innovation for the past 10 years. Early this year, I moved to a more senior strategic position in the OECD, but that was what I've done over the past 10 years, and trying to not to bridge education and policy, education research and policy, but at least to move forward this kind of translational role that the OECD has. The OECD is not a university, it's not a research institution, but we have a lot of data, we do a lot of thinking, we do a lot of analytical work, and we try to have the highest methodological standards in that work, but we still try to do that in an in-between position between research and policy, trying to connect both worlds. I'm coming back to that. But I have also been in a position, and I'm very grateful for that, to be able to reflect on the long-term development of research, long-term development of educational research in particular. And that's why I wanted to bring all my ideas about this together in this keynote. This is the outline of what I want to discuss. My first question is, why is it that educational research is not delivering more or delivering better outputs? And I will focus on a few elements: the quantity of research, the quality of research, but mainly the issue of researchers working in a system with competing knowledge subsystems. So research is only one of the very powerful knowledge systems in education. It's not the knowledge system. You would like to believe that, but that's not true. You have to compete with many other knowledge systems. And especially with politics. And politics is a very particular and very strange kind of animal. I prefer still to call politics a knowledge system. It is because it's driven by ideas which are often not in line with the ideas coming from the research community. So you have these kind of clashes all the time. I have been at so many meetings where ministers were frustrated about researchers telling them what to do, and researchers being frustrated or even angry on the fact that ministers were not listening and not doing what they should be doing. I will try to link that to some more systemic risks of education today, because I believe that our education systems are not in good shape. They are suffering from severe systemic issues. So I wanted to translate the issue of risk, which is in the conference core team, to education itself. What are the risks that education systems are confronted with today? Quality, productivity, equity, innovation. For me, the main risks. And why is educational research not helping education systems to tackle these risks? And maybe it's because we have been focusing on some wrong issues, we have not the right concepts, we have not the right kind of theories, and what can we expect from, let's say, the next wave in educational research, which is what I will call the science of learning. So that's, in a nutshell, what I would like to do this morning. First question, why is educational research not delivering more and better? Education systems are not yet evidence-based. We proclaim sometimes that they are and that they are moving to become more evidence-based. It's simply not true, despite all the work that you are doing. Education systems are still swimming upside down. And they are looking in the mud and in the dark. They are not looking to scientific facts. Why? Maybe first the good news. There are some changes in the positive direction. There is more supply of educational research findings. There is more demand. I think the newer generation of ministers are more open to question things and to listen to researchers. They want to become evidence-based or evidence-informed, which is probably a better term. Ministries are investing a lot in improving their knowledge departments, their knowledge systems, the knowledge chambers in the Netherlands, or institutions in Norway, in England, etc. And there is an interesting role which is emerging over the past years for knowledge brokerage institutions. So institutions which are actually in the middle and try to bring the research knowledge to the educational policy and practice. But it is going very, very slow. I think when I started at ECER 10 years ago, I was already delivering speeches on these topics. And when I look back at these early presentations, and I must confess, not so much has been changing. There has been some positive developments, but very slow, very hesitant. And that's raising the level of frustration. I think there are many people in the room who have that experience of being frustrated, that policymakers are not listening enough, and that they politicize research evidence in this or that direction. That's happening all the time. I don't think you can blame them for doing that, because they are working in a separate knowledge system, and they try to integrate other knowledge into their own thinking. But policymakers are often very, very frustrated as well about what researchers are doing. I have been chief of staff of, I think, one of the best education ministers that my country has had, who has been an academic, a PhD from Oxford, who he thinks scientifically. And every meeting we had with researchers, he left the room frustrated, angry, yelling at me about what my colleagues came to do there, etc., etc. So even a very enlightened person was not able to integrate what people like you came to tell him in these meetings. And you should not disqualify this as kind of, well, politicians are like that. And no, these are real issues. And maybe at the last point that I'm coming back to, that research evidence is only one and not the most dominant knowledge subsystem in education. There are many others. A few words on the quantity and quality of research. We try to have numbers on these issues, and it's not easy. But look at the growing numbers of people coming to ECER and other conferences. This is just showing you the absolute and relative increase in publications and articles in the Scopus database on education. So it's growing, and that's, of course, that's very positive. But we are still ridiculously low. I will make some comparisons with the health sector. The health sector has been able to move in the past 30, 40 years to a really evidence-driven system. And of course, the explosion in biomedical research has been very helpful in making that transition. health and education are approximately of the same size if you count it in terms of public expenditure. Health is still a little bit bigger. But look at the differences in research funding. The research budgets for education are just 1/7 of the research budget of health, or the health sector. And you can't convince me by telling, yes, but we need more research about all kinds of diseases and health issues, etc., etc. No, we should have the same level of research on what we are dealing with. The development of young children, of learners, of adults, their learning behavior, learning strategies, etc., etc. All the topics that you are dealing with. But research is so marginal in the education system. There are also quality issues, and that's maybe becoming a bit more sensitive. It's not only my own personal opinion. This is informed by so many discussions I have had in the field, but also with policymakers. Of course, we are limited in the kind of methodologies that we are able to use. We cannot do what health researchers are doing. Experimental design is still very rare. We have ethical issues. Oh no, I hate that.
But we have problems.
No, I asked in advance. Yeah, okay. Hello, yeah. So we have ethical issues on what we can do in experimentation with children, etc. You all know this. The replicability of educational research is ridiculously low. And I will show you one article on this. It's from 2014, but I didn't find any more recent data, but 0.13% of all education scientific papers are replications. This, for a scientific field, that is just not acceptable. Replication is the main way through which science develops and builds its knowledge base. 0.13% of education articles being replications is a shame. Comparability of effect sizes. I don't know whether you have seen this really devastating paper by Bob Slevin on John Hattie's book that you all know, and which is a Bible in educational research. I never have liked John Hattie's book, but for the first, I was not able to write it down like Bob Slevin did. Please read that blog. It's simply devastating because of the methodological errors in the way that John Hattie is bringing together all the research. Maybe more tricky, the power of dominant paradigms. Educational research is a field much more like any other neighboring field, or like psychology or social sciences, driven by very stable paradigms, which seem to attract a lot of people. For me, social constructivism is such a paradigm. I think it was a useful synthesis of elements from cognitivism, from social behavior theories, etc., into an acceptable synthesis at one point in time. It has lived on, and it has not been able to integrate all the critical analysis that has been following, and is still following. It's still the dominant paradigm, but it's simply based on very shaky grounds. And now my question is then, why is social constructivism so popular among educational scientists and researchers? Despite the fact that a lot of its ideas are falsified in the meantime. Because the value system is attractive to a lot of education researchers. We all think that student-centered learning is better. We all believe in natural curiosity of students, of learners. We all believe that learning is so beautiful. We all believe, etc., etc. So a lot of fashionable ideas and even of myths, which are now gradually being deconstructed by critical research. But the fact that this kind of paradigm can be so dominant and hinders us to really look into the basic issues is very problematic. And then you have a lot of bias, material interests, career interests, ideology, political activism. We all want to fight neoliberalism. We all want to fight nationalist tendencies, etc., and for many good reasons. But there is a very thin line sometimes in research between science and political activity. On bias, you can find many very interesting papers. This is an interesting one from a study at Johns Hopkins University, and who were able to show that effect sizes in tests were 70% greater if the researchers had some link with the developers of the test than when they did not have a link. So bias in research is everywhere. Myths are everywhere. The digital native, the multitasker, etc., etc. A colleague of mine and a friend of mine, Pedro de Brucker in Flanders, has done a lot of work in a publishing book, and a new one is coming together with Paul Kirchner from the Netherlands on this kind of myth busting. And it's a best-selling book in the United States. It's also selling well in Europe, but to a lesser degree. Coming back to that notion, because I think that's very important on competing knowledge systems in education. Something that researchers are underestimating. First of all, there is a huge knowledge gap among teachers. There is a desire for knowledge. This comes from the just published TALIS 2018 survey, where we try to measure what kind of knowledge gaps that teachers are reporting, and this is actually quite frightening. They don't feel well prepared. They don't have the tools, the cognitive tools, but also not the practical tools to engage with the main challenges in the workplace, in the classroom. So the knowledge gap, the knowledge need is there. But research evidence is not seen as the main source to meet that demand. What do you have instead? You have a lot of research, practical-oriented research, which a famous book of the 90s, I don't know whether you remember that book, was really a very shocking book when it was published, on Mode 2 research by Michael Gibbons. So he said that actually the high standards of academic research are not meeting the needs of public policy systems, and that we need some intermediary practical research which are not meeting the highest standards, which have limited validity, and informed by theories and ideas like this, governments in my country and in Belgium, in the Flemish part of Belgium, in the Netherlands and elsewhere, have established kinds of practical research activities where people could do that kind of activity. I'm not saying that I'm against it. I'm just saying that the, let's say, the high-level, methodologically well-developed scientific research has been put in the back of the seat of the bus, because in the front of the seats are people who are doing that kind of Mode 2 research. But you also have professional knowledge. Teachers know best, and that's a very powerful idea in education, which to some extent you also find in the health sector. Medical doctors also, and for good reason, because doctors and teachers are knowledge professionals. They work with ideas. But they think that they know best, that their experiential knowledge is by definition better than the research knowledge. We've always done it this way. Common sense ideas, anecdotal knowledge, tacit knowledge in the system, which is transmitted in teacher training, in professional development, etc., etc. And then the ultimate belief that we are all confronted with: everyone is an expert in education. Parents are experts, lay communities are experts, etc. So defining your own expertise as a researcher against these competing pretensions and ideas is very difficult. I don't know whether you've seen this. The Educational Endowment Foundation in the UK published a very interesting paper based on a survey of teachers. And they had to come to the conclusion that research knowledge has only a small influence on education, on teachers' decision-making relative to other sources. Teachers were most, and that's a quote, teachers were most likely to draw on their own experience, that of their colleagues, when making decisions about teaching and learning or whole school change. And it was quite a sobering. If you look at the figures in the report, it's actually quite sobering. Another example, a quote in another blog of Bob Slevin. If you are interested in these issues, please follow the blogs of Bob Slevin. It's actually very interesting. But he quotes a superintendent in the United States. Good research is that which confirms what I have always believed, and bad research is that which disagrees with what I have always believed. And that's actually that's summarizing a lot of thinking of teachers and school leaders and even professionals higher up in the educational system. But I also think that education is a system which cherishes outdated beliefs. And maybe it's because we work with children and we love children, and if you ask students in educational with science programs why they come to education as a field of study, because I love working with children. So there is a lot of emotional load in education. And it goes back also to still very dominant and very powerful ideas. Jean-Jacques Rousseau has never died in educational research. His romanticism is still there. We are in Germany. The German reform pedagogic is still very influential. Child-centered thinking is still very influential. And I'm not saying that these values are bad. I'm just saying that they should not be the basis of the kind of work that we are doing. In the United States, John Dewey, Paulo Freire, and people who think that critical pedagogy is a very interesting way of thinking. So these pedagogical beliefs and value systems and romantic ideas are still very powerful in education. I didn't find a systematic review study of education handbooks used in teacher training, etc. But it would be worthwhile to do a very critical analysis of the kind of knowledge which is embedded in teacher training handbooks, manuals, and all kinds of resources used in professional development of teachers, etc. Just looking very occasionally into these resources, I myself, I'm flabbergasted sometimes. It's just simply completely outdated knowledge which is codified in these resources. These are not updated. And it's often not researchers who are writing these manuals, but people active all their life in teacher training and being much more familiar with the tacit knowledge in the system than with the present-day research knowledge. And finally, it's well known that education, in comparison to other sectors like health, is risk aversive. Teachers don't like taking risks. And if you do new things based on the latest kind of research, you are not making yourself popular with your colleagues, you are not making yourself, you have an easy life, etc. So it's actually the innovation aversiveness which is also important here. So I've just touched on a number of explanations for the question, why is educational research not penetrating much more than it should be and could be in education policy and practice? And that leads to, a question about the macro efficiency of educational research. Because there is something not right. And it's not an original idea of mine. I was developing this idea when I read the last blog post of Mark Tucker of the National Center for Economy and Education in the United States, a very important influencer and thinker about education systems in the United States. And he just wrote a devastating blog. And the main idea is the United States is probably the country with the highest levels of educational research. They've spent billions and billions, to quote Trump, billions and billions and billions of dollars in educational research. But measured with the NIAP, educational performance has just remained flat, even declined a little bit. So if the purpose of educational research is to improve student performance, student learning, then there is something very wrong with this picture. And you could easily do the same argument for Europe. I'm coming back to that. What then are, for me, the main systemic risks of education systems today? Because that's then looking at the other side. First, quality. And I will not dwell too long on these big issues, but of course there is much more that could be told about all of these 4 risks that I want to mention. But in PISA we see, for Europe on average, the line is quite flat on the average, but there are many changes in the distributions. And in most countries, I think 2 or 3, 4 accepted, you see a decline in the share of students, 15-year-olds, on the top levels of, in this case, science, but you could say the same about math and reading. So on the top levels of, on the top performance levels, you see a decline in achievement. Maybe more telling, and it's a chart that when I developed the statistics together with people from the PIAC survey, the Program in International Assessment of Adult Competencies, I was actually quite struck with it. You have had since the 90s, the International Adult Literacy Survey, the blue bar is the situation in the 90s. Since the 90s, you have had an enormous massification of educational attainment in our population. People with tertiary degrees, people with upper secondary level degrees have increased tremendously in the population. But you don't see a change in the number or in the share of skill levels in the adult population. So we have put many more educated people into the workforce, and you don't see any change in the skills level of that workforce. That's something which is very, very difficult to understand. You even see a slight decline. And again, in the upper levels, in PIAC, administered in most European countries, 2012, 2015, you see a decline in the upper levels of literacy in this case. But the same is for numeracy. Productivity. So keep in mind, at best, stable levels of educational performance, even declining at the top. Productivity. You might say that's not an issue for me, but it is an issue for ministers. The per unit costs of education is exploding. The per student cost. It is exploding in schools, it's exploding in universities. And people repeatedly say, you have to invest more in this. And I know education ministers, they become very, very nervous if the conclusion of research is, you have to invest more money into this or that. Then your story has ended. You don't have the ear anymore, because they know these issues. They know that the cost is exploding, and they expect you to tell them how that is possible and how we can reverse it. How can we make our education systems better in quality, better in equity, at a lower cost? That's their mission. That's their question. This is not sustainable. And I'm a person who wants societies to invest in education. But you will not convince societies at a time of aging, at a time of climate change, at a time of so many other big questions, all asking for taxpayers' money, to invest radically more in education. You can maybe shift the percentage of GDP spent in education a little bit. You will not be able to stop this because the cost is exploding and we don't know why this is happening. And it's happening in all countries. Equity. You all know, probably better than I do, that we are not doing a good job on equity. We still have segregation, we still have underperformance of students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, etc., etc. We will publish PISA 2018 on the 3rd of December, and we will have to bring the same story again and again. We are not improving. The gap in likelihood here of completing tertiary education by parents' background, it has actually increased instead of decreased. The whole bar has shifted upwards, so we are moving more people into higher education and completing higher education, but the impact of parental background, parental education background in this case, has not decreased. And we see it in all indicators. We are not able to solve the equity crisis in education, despite all the research that's done on this issue. Innovation. We are very worried in the OECD, and we're listening also to policymakers and ministers, that we are not able to catch up with the enormous development in technology, in digitalization, in artificial intelligence, etc. And I'm also not convinced that we have to radically change the curriculum. We have to be very prudent when we talk about these fashionable 21st century skills. But there is something radically changing in our environment. And we've seen periods in the history of education when history was not able to catch up, and that caused huge crises. I refer to the famous Golden and Katz book, economists of Harvard who have really done a marvelous historical examination of the context in which education was able to catch up with technological development, and they were able to explain the unemployment in the 20s because of the fact that education was not able to catch up with the second industrial revolution. Many people fear that the same is happening now. The skills demand is changing tremendously. With the things that we are doing well in education, preparing young people for rather simple cognitive tasks, routine cognitive tasks, that's the kind of thing that we are doing well. But these kind of tasks are disappearing. And we are not doing so well in preparing students for these more non-routine cognitive or non-routine communicative skills, so social skills, social problem-solving skills, etc. That's where we are missing the boat. So also in innovation, we are not doing terribly well in education. The consequence is probably going to be, and I'm personally quite convinced that this is happening. When I speak at the OECD with high-level entrepreneurs, business people, they say, you know, for me, education becomes trivial. I don't believe anymore that we have to look the solution for our social problems in the 21st century in education. Ernst & Young, but in the meantime, there is a website following big global companies who are not looking at credentials, qualifications, diplomas, degrees anymore. Ernst & Young was the first one, but you have now a whole long list of companies who have joined that movement and say, when we recruit people, we no longer look at credentials. We test them themselves. We look at the skills that we want, and we test applicants for those skills. So the whole evaluation, testing, credentialing diploma-driven thing, is moving from education systems to the other side, to the employers. But you can imagine that's the only monopoly that education has. It's the gatekeeper of our system. If people do no longer believe that you need a qualification for getting into the job market, and that's still the message that we bring, and ministers keep on telling that message, you need a qualification to be successful in life. It's no longer true. And this is going very fast in the United States. This is becoming a real issue among university leaders. It's not yet an issue in Europe because we are making the labor market so strict with all kinds of regulations embedded in law on diploma qualifications that you need, et cetera, that it takes longer for us to move in that direction, but it's coming there. And that's I think the consequence of the fact that we are not able to solve all of these other risks. So for me, education is in a situation where it is confronted with real systemic risks, attacking the very fundamentals of the system. So what has this to do with research? I think there is something really wrong. More research, better research, and has been an awful lot of improvement in the quality of methodologies used. So I'm not saying that we have problems in methodology. We have basically solved the methodological challenges of 10, 15 years ago. But we have not solved the ultimate problem of relevance and impact. Because there is something very wrong in this equation. More research, better research, but stagnating or decreasing quality, higher per unit cost, stagnant equity, and hesitant innovation. So the system is not changing, despite the input of ideas, knowledge, research findings in the system. Of course, I'm not blaming research only. It's not research only which is responsible, but it is a very legitimate question that people start asking. So we have to move the question from, are we doing things right? That was the main question in educational research over the past 15, 20 years. We have to improve on methodologies, etc. We have to change the question. Are we doing the right things? And that's where I think research has to move on. I have a little quiz here. I have 4 statements. And for me, they have some validity, each of them. And I will ask you, I will first read them and then ask you to raise your hand if you can have multiple answers. So it's not a choice. Research knowledge is adequate but doesn't get implemented because of lack of transmission challenge, wrong political decisions, and the dead weight of existing practice. Second, research knowledge is adequate but is losing the battle with professional knowledge, with tacit knowledge, and other competing kinds of knowledge. 3, research knowledge is adequate but loses power and credibility in the transition from the clean research environment to the messy classroom practice. And 4, research knowledge itself is inadequate because its scientific foundations are deficient. Who feels for 1? Who feels for 2? Who feels for 3? Many more fingers. And who feels for 4? Yeah. Well, you can have multiple answers, but it's just to have a little bit of an idea. I think 3 was a very powerful statement. Even 4 was a statement endorsed by some people. What has the science of learning to do with this? And it's actually more a hypothesis and an idea than a very strong, credible statement. But compared with health, we really have a problem, as I tried to explain to you. education research is not fostering education systems to support learning, to develop the human and social potential of all learners. And if you compare with the health sector has been able to make that transition. Biomedical research has contributed directly through the filters of the health system, and you also have tacit knowledge in health systems, you also have professionals who do their own thing, etc. But there is a very clear causal relationship between the explosion of biomedical research and the improvement in longevity and well-being of people. That's not happening in education. And I think, the more that I reflect about these questions, that the fundamental ways that we look at human learning may be at stake, may be deficient. Because of and I'm trained in pedagogical sciences. I've been trained in the philosophy and historical foundations of pedagogy. So I'm actually now criticizing my own background. But I think the power of pedagogy has been incredibly important in keeping us away from asking the right questions. And I'm involved now in developments in the United States and in Brazil and in many other places in the world where people try to move forward that science of learning. And it's coming not from educational research. It's coming from cognitive psychology, from brain research, from neuroscience, from information sciences, computer sciences, machine learning people, and artificial intelligence, of course, and they say, well, we have to look fundamentally different at learning. And we can bring what apparently pedagogy and a lot of educational sciences have not brought into the research field. And that was quite shocking for me to have that experience. But it's becoming very powerful, and these people are criticizing education, but are also criticizing educational research. And you have very strong developments in Europe in that direction now, in France in particular, with really leading figures in that field who have now been asked by the Minister of Education of the Macron government to give advice. Stan de Hane, I don't know whether you know him, very powerful person in this field. So it is moving in the direction. In some countries, I have been working in the United States on these issues. The National Science Foundation was asked by the government to do this kind of science of learning and to develop this field, because they literally said, we don't believe that educational research can bring us the answers we need. So putting learning first, focusing on the fundamental building blocks, mechanisms of learning, look at interventions, how they work, how they foster or hinder learning, very rigorous research methodologies comparable to the biomedical and psychological fields. This is completely in movement. And so scientific disciplines have their own life. This is just showing you the birth of neuroscience, but there are many other ideas and fields, emerging fields in the making in this regard. I don't believe it's completely revolutionizing the way that we look at human beings, children, and the way that they learn. But it's adding an incredibly interesting new perspective. It is replacing social constructivism, which I believe is not able to give us the answers that we need. And it has many false beliefs and rulings which are detrimental. I think one of the biggest, and I'm quite angry on that one, and I'm expressing myself quite boldly, but the biggest false message given to teachers has been, you have to be a coach. You don't have to be an instructor. You just keep away. The teacher as a coach, which is the ultimately lethal message to a professional that a teacher should be. And I see every day publications, handbooks, messages going to teachers on You have to believe in the power of students for their own learning. They will be self-directed in their learning, and you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. You just have to be a coach. Well, coaching by teachers is one of the most powerful explanations for the crisis that education is in. I strongly believe that. Okay, that's a side message. But you see that many very powerful ideas in the field of education are now coming under attack from these kind of research fields and developments. But they are still in the handbooks that we use. Maslow's pyramid. It has been falsified hundreds and hundreds of times, and people still use it. Why? Crazy. The concept of multiple intelligence. I have a high respect for Howard Gardner. But he himself said, well, I made a mistake. It's not true. But people still use it. It's in handbooks. Learning styles, another one. Learning styles theory by Kolb has been so popular in our field, and people did all kinds of experiments on it. It has been falsified by rigorous analysis. Don't use it anymore. It's simply not true. People don't have different learning styles. Growth mindset. Carol Dweck, very popular in the United States, and people have now discovered the ultimate formula, growth mindset. Of course, it takes some time before people really do serious work on this. Again, falsified, not true. No one is against having a strong belief in your potential and believing that you can achieve, etc., etc. But the idea itself that you can develop growth mindset through specific interventions. But it's one of the most popular books in education. It's on the top of any list. It's in handbooks. People believe it. So, are we really able to correct our fundamental understandings of learning? To draw the conclusions for the field of educational research, for how to intervene in educational systems, for correctly advising ministers of education. Choosing the side of the learner, not of the education system. At the OECD, we try to foster that work. It's not very easy because it's not high on the agenda of education ministries. We just published an interesting book which brings together some experiences and some developments in other countries, and specifically in the United States, in the Science of Learning of the National Center for Research, which is a very powerful development. So we hope that in the future we are moving in the right direction. Thank you so much for your attention.